Ancient people were a lot smarter than we give them credit for. They've constructed massive pyramids, beautiful stone monoliths, and highly advanced megastructures, rivaling even today's engineering prowess. These are some of the most fascinating structures built thousands of years ago. These are the top 15 mysterious ancient mega projects. Number 15. Newgrange. While the fields of eastern Ireland may not look like much, Newgrange certainly stands out amongst the green landscape. That's because this giant circular mound, which measures in at 85 meters in circumference and 13 meters in height, was made by local farmers some 5,200 years ago, and holds the distinction of being composed of 200,000 tons of rock, which likely would have taken the farmers many years to construct. Interestingly enough, Newgrange's purpose is also pretty incredible, as it was likely used as a burial ground, temple, and calendar. As a result, Newgrange was likely the center point of local life thousands of years ago. Number 14. Sanchi Stupa. Holding the distinction of being both one of India's oldest buildings and one of its most incredible is Sanchi Stupa. That's because this site, which is also known as the Great Stupa, was built around the year 300 BC by the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka and is believed to house the ashes of the Buddha. Now, its large dome shape, many pillars, and beautiful gateways truly mark it as unique, and due to its historical significance, is currently considered to be a UNESCO World Heritage Site. As a result, it's become a popular tourist and pilgrimage site to this day. Number 13. The Grand Canal. While canals are generally associated with places such as Venice, Egypt, and Panama, it turns out that a much older rendition exists in China. Known as the Grand Canal, it stands apart for not only being a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but also the longest canal or artificial river in the world. That's because this canal, which links the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers, spans for a total of 1,776 kilometers and is believed to have taken over 1,000 years to get it to its current size. However, it goes without saying that this must have been a massive infrastructure project, and it likely took thousands upon thousands of laborers to complete this engineering feat. Regardless, it certainly was made to last and is still used extensively to this day. Number 12. The Pons Fabricus. As far as bridges go, the Pons Fabricus was certainly ahead of its time, which was built in Rome in the year 26 BC to connect Tiber Island to the Campus Martius, had stood the test of time and is still used today. That's largely because it not only used high-quality materials such as tough and peperino stone, but more importantly has an additional arc in the center pier, with this arc ultimately giving high waters an escape route while alleviating pressure on the hefty foundation. As a result, it shouldn't come as a surprise that it's been able to stave off heavy erosion and is still mostly intact despite its age. Number 11. The Carnac Stones. While Stonehenge may be the most popular set of stones in the world, the Carnac Stones certainly give it a run for its money. That's because this site is not only home to over 3,000 standing granite stones, but also made upwards of 6,500 years ago. Now, the exact purpose of them is still unknown. However, there are a number of interesting hypotheses. For example, while some believe the site was used to track the sun and the stars, others believe that it could have been used as anything from a burial ground to an earthquake detector. However, chances are that their true purpose will remain a mystery for the foreseeable future. Number 10. The Stone Spheres of Costa Rica. While there are many incredible rocks out there, few are quite as fascinating as the stone spheres of Costa Rica. That's because these spectacular stones, which are known locally as Las Bolas, date back to 600 AD and were made by the indigenous Diqui people. Now, admittedly, very little is known about them today, as the Diqui were wiped out when the Spanish colonized the area a few hundred years ago. However, it appears that the spheres themselves were made by hammering basalt, limestone, and sandstone together and sanding the conglomeration out into the shape of a sphere, with their size ranging from just a few centimeters long to as much as 2 meters in diameter and 15 tons in mass. However, historians really aren't sure as to what the stones were used for, with most hypothesizing that they were either used as landscape decorations on the property of a chieftain's house, markers to point the way to significant places, or tools to help them with the study of astronomy. Regardless, their true use will likely remain a mystery for years to come. Number 9. The Nazca Lines. While there are many ancient carvings out there, few are quite as extensive as the Nazca Lines. That's because these designs, which are located on the Peruvian coastal plain about 400 kilometers south of Lima, Peru, span an incredible length of over 1,300 kilometers and an area of about 50 square kilometers. Made about 2,000 years ago, they are large, elaborate etchings of zoomorphic designs such as birds, fish, lizards, dogs, trees, flowers, and humans, with the majority being etched into the rock at a depth of between 10 to 15 centimeters. Now, what is perhaps most fascinating about them is that they can only be fully seen by air, which is odd considering that the indigenous people who crafted these images would have had no means of being able to fly over the images in order to see them. Regardless, despite there being wild speculation as to what their purpose was, it appears that they most likely had some sort of astronomical or religious significance, with the idea being that they were made so they could be seen by deities located in the sky. Regardless, despite all of the hypotheses out there, no one is 100% sure as to what they were really used for. We are constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button. Number 8. The Great Wall of China. While there are many ancient walls that have been built throughout history, few are as recognizable as the Great Wall of China. That's because this structure, which stretches for a total of about 21,196 kilometers across northern China, was one of the most time-consuming yet effective infrastructure projects ever undertaken. That's because it's estimated that it took almost 2,000 years to complete, as each Chinese dynasty gradually lengthened it over time to meet emerging threats, with it becoming especially important in protecting the Silk Road against incoming invaders. However, the very first rulers to work on the wall predate the dynasties, as it was the Duke of the Qi state that first began the construction of the wall in about the year 770 BC. Yet it was the rulers during the Ming dynasty that built and restored much of what remains of the wall today between the years 1368 and 1644. Now, contrary to popular belief, only about 70% of the Great Wall of China is actual wall, as about 30% of it consists of either natural barriers such as mountains and rivers, or alternate defenses such as moats and ditches. However, the parts that have been properly built up are quite impressive, with their height ranging between 5 to 8 meters and their length consisting of guard towers at a minimum interval of about 500 meters, with these being even more concentrated in areas that were considered to be especially vulnerable. As a result, the Great Wall of China truly was a different obstacle to overcome for anyone trying to attack China from the north. Number 7. Hadrian's Wall. It turns out that the Great Wall of China isn't the only impressive wall to have been constructed in ancient times, as Hadrian's Wall was yet another that held firm against enemy invasions. That's because this structure, which was built between the years 122 and 128, stretched across almost the entirety of England's width, with it running a total of 117.5 kilometers from the Irish Sea on the west coast, before stopping just a little bit short of the North Sea on the east coast. Now, the entirety of Hadrian's Wall was made up of stone and likely painted white so that it would shine in the sun, with it supposedly marking the border between the Roman world and the barbarian tribes of England's hinterlands. It was also heavily fortified, with guard towers being placed at regular intervals and forts being built every 7 kilometers or so. However, despite all of this work being put into it, many historians are confused as to why it was built. After all, the economic cost of building such a massive wall likely didn't justify the small-scale raids that would have occurred had it not been put up. Regardless, although it's not exactly in the best of shape, parts of it can still be visited to this day. Number 6. The Parthenon. Of all the temples that have been built throughout history, few are as impressive as the Parthenon, which is an architectural marvel that was commissioned by the Greek statesman Pericles in 447 BC and completed in 432 BC. Now, despite looking perfectly straight and symmetrical, its Doric columns are in fact tapered, allowing the temple to appear this way despite the fact that it features no right angles and no straight lines. The Parthenon is almost completely made of Pentelic marble and limestone, with it being believed that a material known as frieze once wrapped around the top of the exterior wall. Yet beyond the architecture, it was said that the building itself was a source of controversy at the time, as rather than use funds to raise what would be the equivalent of an entire army to defend against the Persians, those funds were used to build this beautiful temple that was dedicated to the goddess Athena. And while different empires have now come and gone, the Parthenon remains as one of the most popular tourist attractions in the entire world. Number 5. Stonehenge. Of all the ancient sites on this list, few are as shrouded in as much mystery as Stonehenge. That's because this ring of standing rocks, which is located in the Salisbury Plain in southern England, is very poorly understood by historians and archaeologists. Now, what we do know is that the construction of Stonehenge was likely done in stages over thousands of years, with the first phase being the digging of a large circular pit at least 5,000 years ago. From there, additions were made over time, with the site's trademark stones being placed, with about 80 blue stones being placed a few hundred years later, and at least 50 sarsen stones being placed around the year 2000 BC. Now, the interesting thing about these stones is that rather than be sourced locally, they came from distant locales. For example, sar stones, which at their largest weigh more than 40 tons and rise to a height of 7 meters, were likely sourced from quarries 40 kilometers north of Salisbury Plain and transported with the help of sledges and ropes, which would have made bringing them to the site an incredibly difficult task. However, this pales in comparison to the hardships surrounding the transport of the 4-ton bluestones, which have been sourced to the Preseli Hills in Wales and are about 320 kilometers away from Stonehenge, leading many historians to believe that they must have been transported by raft from the Welsh coast and up the Avon River in order to reach the Salisbury Plain. Regardless, it goes without saying that such a transport operation would have been an incredible feat considering the technology available at the time. Number 4. The Colosseum. As far as ancient buildings go, few are quite as iconic or revered as the Colosseum. Built between the years of 70 and 80 AD by the Roman Emperor Vespasian, it was meant to be a gift to the Roman people so they could watch gladiator fights and other entertainment. Now, the area was chosen due to its central location, which placed it both symbolically and precisely at the heart of Rome. Constructed using materials such as wood, limestone, tuff, tiles, cement, and mortar, it was largely financed by the spoils taken from the Jewish temple after the First Jewish-Roman War of 70 AD. And once completed, it could reportedly seat between 50 to 80,000 spectators. Now, it must be kept in mind that the entertainment was a lot more gory in those days, and as such, the events that took place at the Colosseum, while rather gross in the eyes of the majority of people today, were considered prime entertainment in Roman times. That's because oftentimes fights would not just occur between gladiators, but between both them and exotic animals, such as rhinoceros, crocodiles, bears, bulls, and elephants. These gladiators were like the sports stars of the ancient world, with some amassing massive fortunes that rival even some of today's greatest athletes. Yet beyond gladiator fights, the Colosseum would often host a number of other events. For example, the Colosseum had the potential to be flooded so that naval battles could be recreated, as it is believed that it used to have a wide floodable channel down its central axis in order to make this possible. It was also often used for non-combative purposes such as theater, as the fact that the Colosseum is an amphitheater makes it the perfect shape for such a performance. However, most interestingly of all, at times even natural scenes were recreated within it, as forests filled with animals would sometimes be made so that audience could catch a glimpse of what terrains across the empire looked like. Regardless, it goes without saying that the Colosseum really was the place to be in the ancient world. Number 3. The Egyptian Pyramids. Out of all the entries on this list, few are quite as famous as the Egyptian pyramids. That's because these pyramids, which were built between 2630 BC and about 650 BC, were the burial grounds of the country's pharaohs and consorts, and are nothing if not impressive. Not only did they tower to heights of almost 150 meters, but they also had a number of uses that went beyond being a simple tombstone. That's because Egyptian mythology deemed there to be a close connection between both astronomy and the dead, and as such, the pyramids were made so they would align perfectly with the Big Dipper and Little Dipper in a north-south direction, with this feature being so accurate that it was never off by more than 0.05 degrees. However, of all the pyramids out there, none are quite as impressive as the Great Pyramid of Giza. After all, this pyramid holds the distinction of being both the only surviving wonder of the ancient world and for being the world's tallest building for more than 3,800 years, and as such, it took a lot of effort to create. In fact, estimates state that it took a workforce of between 20 to 100,000 laborers about 15 years to construct, due to the fact that they had to move about 2 million 2.5-ton limestone bricks across the desert so they could be used at the location of the tomb. And while this is already impressive in and of itself, this pyramid further stands apart to it having the distinction of having been used as a sundial and modified astrolabe, as the point of its tip could reflect the sun in such a way that it could both tell the time and signal solstices and equinoxes. As a result, the Great Pyramid of Giza truly is one of the most incredible structures ever built. Number 2. The Moai of Easter Island. As far as mega projects go, few are as remote as the one that took place on Easter Island. That's because the Chilean region of Easter Island is located quite literally in the middle of nowhere, and is about 3,500 kilometers away from the South American continent and about 2,000 kilometers away from the nearest inhabited island. Yet despite this, Rapa Nui people have lived on the island for centuries, and throughout this time they've constructed almost 1,000 massive moai statues, with the majority believed to have been created between the years 1250 and 1500. And while this may not make them ancient, the sheer effort that must have been made to construct them still gives them a spot on this list. You see, the process of making a moai started by picking out a large stone to be used, the average stone being about 20 tons, and the height of said stone often being upwards of 6 meters. These stones would then be transported to the area which they were to be buried via a system of boards and ropes, with this labor being so intense and tedious that it took ropes that were about 200 meters long just to get the task done. However, once in the correct spot, the moai would then be carved to be in the likeness of a human and then lowered into the ground so that the majority of the stone was submerged while only the head would be above the surface. Then, once this was complete, the moai would have colored stones placed into its eyes in order to activate its supposed powers. However, this still begs the question as to what purpose the moai served, and while the exact use of them is still disputed to this day, it's believed that each family had a moai associated with it, and that the moai would be used as a family symbol in ceremonies and as a burial ground for deceased relatives. As a result, the moai are still revered by Easter Island's inhabitants to this day. Number 1. The Roman aqueducts. Everyone knows that water is essential to human life, and as a result, it shouldn't come as a surprise that no city can function without a decent supply of this life-saving liquid. This was a fact that the Romans knew well, and as a result, they created a large series of aqueducts, or water transport channels, in order to transport fresh water to the cities, homes, and farms throughout the empire. And although they were not the first to create them, as variations made in India and Egypt predate them, the Romans were the first to make them truly expansive, as they created multiple that stretched across hundreds of kilometers of terrain in cities empire-wide, with the first being built in 312 BC and the last in 226 AD. These aqueducts essentially work by taking water from a freshwater source such as a mountain stream and then funneling it on a downward slope towards a city, using gravity and the natural slope of the land to ensure that the water would reach its target. Along the way, this water would pass through sediment filters to rid the water of dirt and debris, and often it would continuously flow through ceramic pipes in order to ensure that it would not sit and pick up bacteria. And while most would flow underneath the surface of the earth at a depth of between ½ meter to 1 meter, there were some that would be funneled through massive bridges and funnels that towered over the countryside, making this system as beautiful as it was functional. However, what's perhaps most incredible of all is that many of these aqueducts are still in use today. That's because despite their age, the quality of the craftsmanship in making these structures have allowed them to provide many modern-day cities with water, and be it supplying much of Rome's amazing fountains or the Croatian city of Split's water taps, it's clear that the aqueduct has truly stood the test of time. Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.